In Maʿarra, our troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled. The chroniclers did not hide it. They didn't apologize or excuse it. Instead, they described it plainly, almost clinically. Crusaders, knights who had taken holy vows, men who wore the cross of Christ, openly cooked and consumed Muslims in the city of Maʿarra. To understand why the Crusaders resorted to such open acts of cannibalism, we need to step back a few months. It was late autumn of the year 1098, and the Crusaders had already endured more than 3 brutal years on the march from Europe. In June, after 8 grueling months, they had conquered the heavily fortified city of Antioch, but victory came at a cost. Thousands of men died in battle or from disease and starvation. They had anticipated rich supplies and abundant food from captured cities, but Antioch's reserves had been almost entirely exhausted during the siege, and new supplies never arrived. The countryside had been stripped bare by war. Crusader chroniclers grimly recorded their desperation, noting that soldiers resorted first to eating their own horses, then dogs, leather shoes, and even rats. But the hunger persisted. Jerusalem, their ultimate goal, was still hundreds of miles away, and standing between the Crusaders and the Holy City lay numerous fortified Muslim towns, including Maʿarra. If they wanted any hope of survival, let alone conquest, these towns had to fall quickly. Maʿarra al-Nu'man was not a major military stronghold. It wasn't guarded by a hardened garrison of professional warriors. Instead, most defenders were local militia, citizens who took up arms only when forced to. But what the city lacked in experienced soldiers, it made up for with high, thick stone walls built generations earlier. Chroniclers noted that the defenders openly ridiculed the Crusaders from atop their ramparts, hurling insults as freely as stones and arrows. But their arrogance would soon come back to bite them, literally. In late November 1098, angered by repeated insults hurled from Maʿarra's walls, the Crusaders launched an impulsive and poorly organized assault. Driven by rage rather than planning, they rushed forward, carrying hastily assembled scaling ladders that proved embarrassingly inadequate. They didn't even reach the top of the city walls. The defenders easily repelled this initial assault. Recognizing that brute force alone wouldn't suffice, the Crusaders settled in for a prolonged siege. For 2 weeks they remained encamped outside Maʿarra, constructing siege engines, including a massive siege tower designed to finally overcome the city's defenses. During this time, the Crusaders repeatedly sent envoys into the city offering terms for surrender. Their proposal was straightforward: surrender peacefully, accept a Frankish governor, and the citizens would keep their lives and property intact. Confident in their walls, the defenders rejected these terms outright. But the Crusaders' siege tower soon proved decisive. On December 11th, the massive wooden structure was pushed forward, allowing knights to pour over the city's battlements. Simultaneously, a smaller group of Crusaders managed to scale an undefended portion of the wall on the opposite side of the city, catching the defenders by surprise. Within hours, Maʿarra's walls had fallen, and the remaining defenders regrouped deeper inside the city, behind hastily barricaded streets and buildings. By nightfall, realizing victory was theirs, the Crusader leadership halted further attacks, negotiating instead a peaceful surrender with prominent citizens of Maʔarra. They agreed to spare the inhabitants in exchange for safe passage and the transfer of authority to a Frankish administration. But not all Crusaders honored this truce. As darkness fell, some of the poorer and hungrier Crusaders, frustrated by weeks of starvation, began looting the city, ignoring any negotiated promises. By dawn on December 12th, these men had already taken whatever meager provisions remained in Maʔarra, leaving virtually no food for the main Crusader army. When the rest of the Crusaders awoke hungry and realized they had been denied their promised food and plunder, they went mad and stormed into the city, embarking on an uncontrolled rampage of violence and slaughter. A contemporary observer captured the carnage vividly. No corner of the town was clear of Saracen corpses, and one could scarcely go about the streets except by treading on their dead bodies. But even this shocking violence was only the prelude to what would come next. Fulcher of Chartres wrote grimly, "I shudder to tell that many of our people, harassed by the madness of excessive hunger, cut pieces from the buttocks of the Saracens already dead, which they cooked, but when it was not roasted to their taste, they devoured it with savage mouths." These acts weren't isolated or secretive. They were performed openly and systematically. Albert of Aachen similarly recorded that the Christians did not shrink from eating not only killed Turks or Saracens, but even dogs. What's notable is the openness of these acts. No attempt was made to hide or conceal them. The Crusaders prepared human bodies in plain sight, boiling flesh in communal cooking pots, roasting limbs over open fires, and leaving the evidence scattered throughout the city streets. Word of the cannibalism at Maʿarra spread swiftly throughout the region. Chroniclers on both sides, Christian and Muslim, recorded these gruesome events. The brutal tactics had an immediate psychological impact. Cities that had previously mocked or resisted the Crusaders quickly changed their strategy. Shaizar, Hama, and Homs, all strategically significant points along the route to Jerusalem, abandoned plans for defense. Instead, they offered terms of surrender, tribute, or safe passage to avoid the fate of Maʿarra. Although historians debate whether the Crusaders consciously planned cannibalism as a form of psychological warfare, the result was undeniable. It worked. Their monstrous reputation cleared the path to Jerusalem more effectively than swords or siege engines alone ever could. Despite the shocking nature of the events at Maʿarra, the official reaction from the Church was notable for what it lacked: condemnation. Neither Pope Urban II, who had launched the First Crusade, nor any high-ranking clerical authority publicly denounced or even directly acknowledged that their army of Christ was now cooking and eating humans. The Crusader chroniclers themselves expressed discomfort, even shame, at the atrocities. Fulcher of Chartres described the cannibalism with evident revulsion, yet he and other church-affiliated historians never suggested punishing those responsible. This collective silence from church authorities reveals a pragmatic truth. Success in the Crusade, seizing Jerusalem, outweighed all moral considerations. So the church remained quiet, privately uncomfortable perhaps, but publicly silent. After Maʿarra, the Crusaders faced little resistance as they continued their march. In fact, cannibalism seemed to help them achieve their immediate objective. The Crusaders conquered Jerusalem in July of 1099 and established their kingdom, hailed in Europe as heroes and champions of Christendom. In the end, the Crusaders got what they wanted, and cannibalism helped them get it.